thank you very much, Cory, and I want to thank all of the organizers of this conference. I want to thank Greg Henriquez and everybody else, and also it is it's a huge honor to be invited to present here, along with there's some pretty amazing people who I don't feel like I can hold up a candle to, but we'll see how it goes. All right, so so a lot of you guys know I'm the co-founder of the Enlightened Worldview Project, and today I'm going to be doing a deeper dive into the word enlightenment and that concept. And so I'll go ahead and start my share my screen here. Just a moment. All right, so you guys can see that?
Yep, it's coming through.
All right, so Enlightenment 2.0, closing the gap through the convergence of UTOK and Western and Eastern Enlightenment traditions. Okay, so for the agenda here today, I'm going to first try to develop a comprehensive definition of enlightenment that integrates the Western rational enlightenment and the Eastern spiritual enlightenment traditions. I'm going to recap Greg Henriquez's notion of the Enlightenment Gap and how the unified theory of knowledge addresses it. I'm going to make the case for why a smaller Enlightenment gap still remains. And I'm going to explain how we can further close the Enlightenment gap through this more comprehensive definition of enlightenment referenced above. Finally, I'm going to explain how this can lead to a new age of enlightenment, which we might call Enlightenment 2.0. Okay, so what is enlightenment? And this is a word that is important to both Western and Eastern traditions, and it carries both intellectual and spiritual connotations. So the word is the signifier points to diverse meanings in different contexts, but it is usually presented as something positive that we should strive for in our personal and social lives. And people will use this word in a way that is implicitly meant to connect to some intellectual and or spiritual tradition. And there isn't necessarily, maybe there isn't an overlap, or maybe there is. A lot of times you can think of the jingle jangle problem as being, okay, we use these words, these terms, and they have an intellectual tradition. And you can almost think of plotting these as like a Venn diagram, and you're trying to find like, what's the convergence point? And there's a lot of times that, I think that's what they're doing with Vervaeke and some of the others, and Vanderpool and the other people, about like, what is wisdom? They're trying to like, what is, when I say wisdom, I mean this, and when I say wisdom, I mean this, and like, what's that intersection point? So I want to see if there is an intersection point for enlightenment, and maybe we could do something with that. All right, so a dictionary might offer something like, okay, so enlightenment is to give intellectual or spiritual light to, instruct, impart knowledge to. But okay, so but then there's that's what a dictionary might say. So it's pretty general. But then there's slightly more specific definitions coming from different traditions, different places and times. So we can probably look at, okay, the two major sides of thought in world history are the Eastern and the Western, and that's kind of a rough distinction. But okay, so the Western would be actually that would include the Middle East, that would include Europe and the Americas, and the East would be like, okay, so India, China, related nearby countries, Korea, Japan, etc. And we could say that there was probably some cross-fertilization between these intellectual cultures over time, but that was slightly more recent, like 20th century, or when things really started to converge. And now what we have in our 21st century intellectual tradition that's evolving and emerging is we do have this interconnection. But in order to really understand what's going on and to fully integrate, I think we need to look back to when these different intellectual traditions were mostly separate from each other. Okay, so intellectual enlightenment according to the Western rational tradition. Immanuel Kant said this is man's emergence from his self-incurred immaturity and emergence from dogmatic slumbers. So Kant argued that people have a tendency to bring a certain type of immaturity upon themselves because they lack the courage to use their own autonomous reason, intellect, and wisdom without the guidance of authority figures. There were some of the main guiding values of the 18th century philosophical movement known as the Age of Enlightenment. And Steven Pinker, Enlightenment values were essential in the development of science and the creation of our modern world, in which the quality of life is far higher and the levels of suffering and death are far lower. So Pinker identifies additional Enlightenment ideals that were also instrumental to the progress of humanity and has made in recent centuries, including skepticism, liberty, fraternity, equality, and progress, and getting away from ignorance, dogmatism, authority, tradition, superstition, and prejudice. And we could say maybe some common threads are reason, independence of thought, and progress. And then we have the Eastern spiritual tradition of enlightenment. And a lot of times when people, like in these communities and these organizations and a lot of these, meetings, people say, enlightenment, that's actually, a little closer to what they mean, and it's a little hard to actually get that context, sometimes, like, are you talking about this or that? So what is the enlightenment according to the Eastern spiritual tradition? And a lot of this comes down to how did they decide to translate the Sanskrit and Pali word bodhi into English? Because they perhaps could have used a different word, but they chose enlightenment in English, and also in the way that the word enlightenment would translate into French or German or other languages from Europe that have a strong intellectual tradition, so that the word bodhi was translated into the word for enlightenment that was common there. So there's that connection. That connection was drawn, so bodhi means the knowledge, wisdom, or awakened intellect. Zen Buddhism, satori, means the spontaneous experience of enlightenment as awakening or apprehension of the true nature of reality. Who is unmuted? Maybe that's me. Excuse me. I have COVID, by the way. I'm doing a decent job considering. All right. So Vedanta means enlightenment means being freed from the mental constraints of binary opposition that can lead to extreme polarities of thought and opponent processing that reinforces addiction. All right, so common threads to the Eastern spiritual tradition of enlightenment are sensing, compassion, communication, and an ongoing effort to developing and maintaining inner and outer peace in one's life. And so there have been some attempts at formulating a synthesis definition of enlightenment as well. Ken Wilbur, for example, in some of his books, he's actually a few different ways that he's formulated this, and then there were different iterations of his thought over time. So the more recent, I guess they call it Wilbur 5 or something, in integral spirituality and integral meditation. And he's got different ways of wording this, but this is the one that I'm going with here. Is enlightenment is being one with, or transcending and including, all states and all stages at any given time in history. The former is horizontal enlightenment, the latter vertical enlightenment. And what that means is over the course of the development of human history, there is a highest possible level of breadth of understanding and embrace that you could have had. Like at a hunter-gatherer times, you couldn't really expect people to have a global, all-encompassing embrace, so and then in more recent times you can. But then he was also bringing in the states, like you can actually have these levels of state experiences, which are, that's the gross, subtle, causal, non-dual, which is the whole thing I don't have time to get into right now, but a lot of you guys are familiar with that. And Andrew Cohen, who I'm mentioning here, he's a controversial figure, but I figure I needed to mention him because he had a magazine called What is Enlightenment? So, and he has a similar conception. Enlightenment does not refer to an unchanging state, but has to be in accord with an ongoing evolution of humanity, which is the authentic self. So there is some similarities that has to Wilbur's conception of enlightenment. Excuse me. Again, I had COVID, gosh. Let's see if I can hold it together. All right, so, and then John Vervaeke, enlightenment is the developmental process that gives us reliable amelioration and alleviation of the perennial problems. So the perennial problems include machinery that makes us self-deceptive and self-destructive. The ways of the machinery of relevance realization can lead us to despair, and that can deeply undermine our agent-arena relationship. And we can also experience meaninglessness and absurdity. So essentially the developmental processes that give us reliable amelioration and alleviation of these perennial problems, though that is enlightenment. All right. And so looking at, okay, what are the common themes from the Eastern and Western conceptions of enlightenment? Enlightenment is dependent on intellectual development and knowledge and being in right relation with oneself, one's community, and the world. The essence of enlightenment is that peace, harmony, and contentment are found and developed through knowledge, reason, compassion, and understanding. And we can seek increased enlightenment while also acknowledging that enlightenment is more of a process than an identifiable state of being or endpoint. So what I'm saying is that enlightenment is the degree to which one can one is able to attain satisfactory answers to questions in life. Not necessarily intellectual questions, but like things that as you develop a worldview, there are things needing. You have needs in life, and if you have satisfactory answers on the basis of observation and reason, and the extent to which such realizations lead one to find inner peace, and also peace in your social organization, your social relations. Enlightenment is a line of development that combines the ability to make sense and make meaning within one's environment, and to model internal and external reality in a way that is accurate and allows one to optimally survive and thrive in their environment, including the relations to one's surroundings and with other conscious beings. It is found and maintained through harmonious, fruitful, and contented relationships, and also within one's inner feelings. That's my attempt to bring it together. In this unified definition, enlightenment is dependent on holonic, bottom-up, and top-down interpenetration. What I mean by that is, there's some theories out there that there's like a symphony of selves, there's sub-selves, and when those are in harmony, or at least working toward, it's like a process. You are working toward a more harmonious state internally, and also with your friends, family, community, nation, world, in those relationships. you and others are collectively working toward more peace, harmony, contentment through knowledge, reason, compassion, and understanding. So in a sense, enlightenment is already here, but we can see opportunities to become more enlightened. This is because we can identify sources of suffering and disharmony within our own minds and within our social lives. And we can see opportunities to work toward peace through knowledge, reason, compassion, and understanding. And so the Enlightenment Gap. It's an essential aspect of UTOK. Refers to the knowledge gap that emerged from during the 17th and 18th century European Enlightenment. These knowledge systems never adequately defined the field of psychology, nor the concept of mind. And these movements failed to provide an adequate, coherent, and reliable and broadly encompassing social sciences. So UTOK fills the Enlightenment gap by solving the problem of psychology, providing the TOK system to describe the relationship between matter and mind phenomena, and providing elements such as the influence matrix, along with behavioral investment systems and justification systems theory, to provide a grounding for the social sciences. So that is Greg Enriquez's work with UTOK, but a smaller gap does still remain. Okay, the UTOK system does much to fill in the Enlightenment gap, but a smaller gap still remains, and it is primarily situated in the culture plane within TOK. So we still don't have a reliable process for addressing our greater socio-cultural, economic, and political challenges. We don't have a reliable way to identify the aspects of different people's inner world that are causing and sustaining divisions within our society. We don't have a reliable way to foster a sense of unity across different communities. So we can further close this gap through the convergence of Western and Eastern traditions guided by UTOK. And all right, actually, I think I wanted to back up a bit. So in the mind plane, we have individual, family, and group therapy. Okay, so that's what Greg talks about a lot. And a lot of people who are participating in this conference, it's based on like, okay, therapy at the individual level. In some cases, we have spiritual leaders who offer that as well. But how do we scale this up to society-wide challenges, such as the meta crisis, such as how we keep degrading our natural environment? Seems to be a breakdown in sociocultural cohesion and apparent instability of our political and economic systems. And the psychological therapy provides means of improvement and reliable interventions, but our cultural, political, and economic institutions seem to be backsliding or stagnating. So how do we use anything like the therapy model applied to the mind plane of individual and group and family therapy and try to apply it to larger society-wide challenges? So in order to do this, we need to broaden our epistemological framework so that they can apply to all aspects of life. In doing so, we might be able to further fill the Enlightenment gap. We can explore possible relations between UTOK and phenomenology and to Eastern thought. So, for example, how do we identify shared core values? What psychotechnologies can provide us deep insights into our inner world? This would include embodiment, authenticity, conflict, end goals, shadow. How do we engage in these practices in a way that is more reliable and leads us to greater compassion, contentment, and harmony throughout all of our relationships? And this is really interesting here, is that Greg talks about JI dynamics. He pronounces that just JII, that's justification, influence, and investment. So that's That's within this tripartite model of mind, you actually have, with the behavioral investment theory. So that's like, okay, so what are we investing our time, our mental and emotional energy into? So we can be mindful of that. We can actually have mindfulness practices that help us understand this behavioral investment that we are engaged in. And also the influence matrix, where there's a self-other dynamic, there's a hostility versus affiliation dynamic, so you have that. You can be mindful of those influence factors on you. You can be mindful of the justification system. That's the symbolic language and forms of communication that you're using. And a lot of times people don't even realize what they're doing, what they're saying, what they're signifying, and how these are, a lot of times it's subconsciously that you're trying to get ahead somehow, and you're not always being 100% honest with yourself or honest with others. So if you can try to become mindful of that and how those come together, the JII, then you can actually learn to have greater inner peace and also more peaceful social relations. So just imagine your interaction with social institutions or even hyper objects that you can also look at in terms of, okay, we have all these social theories and there's a lot of complexity there, but you can see the connection between your inner world and these factors and how you are interacting with hyperobject, with institutions, with social groups. You can be mindful of those factors, and that we can, once we are kind of more collectively mindful of these factors, we can actually start to do interventions to improve these institutions. I just want to make sure I got a few minutes left here. How much more can I fit in? I do want to have some time for questions as well. And all right, so these paradigms, epistemes, and psychotechnologies that are, part of phenomenology or part of Eastern thought. A lot of them are not fully scientific, but we can nonetheless have maybe science-like or science-adjacent ways of doing them. They can be evidence-based. One includes certain phenomenological descriptions and hermeneutics interpretations as forms of evidence. They can be methodological. They can include processes for building mutual understanding, processes for weeding out inaccuracies, and can lead us to inner peace within our psyche and also outer peace within our social connections. And so finally, Enlightenment 2.0. And this is the assumed to be, okay, so the first Enlightenment was the Age of Enlightenment, although this is, you could say there's probably already been more than one Enlightenment, because what Vervaeke refers to as the mindfulness revolution in India from about, 500 BC, maybe that was an Enlightenment as well. But anyways, we talk about, okay, Enlightenment 2.0, which is something that we can start doing now, a new axial age. So Hansi Freinacht talks about following a tenfold path that connects the so-called empirical politics and the existential politics, because within the Hansi Freinacht books, there are 6 new forms of politics, and one of which is based a lot on sense making, and another one is based a lot on inner awareness. So what we have here is evaluate, survey, rate, and publicize the degree of evidence-based practices within institutions, improve the quality, relevance, and reliability of science, cultivate and develop the cultivation and development of the critical meta-discussion of science and its role in society, increase the number of exchanges between scientific fields, which is something we're talking about a lot here at this conference. Increase the average ability for critical thinking and logical reasoning in the general population. The founding of cross-checking media institutes. Support of co-development of political culture. Support of the development of popular culture in an empirically correct direction. The precision and reliability of everyday language. I think that's one of the things we're trying to do as well in this conference. And support the ontological security of the population, that is also related somehow to what we're talking about with improving these institutions to help people be able to provide an adequate living for themselves. All right, so that's Hansi's 10-point plan, and this is John Stewart, who wrote about the new Enlightenment, and he said the first European Enlightenment was driven by the spread of abstract rational cognition, and the second Enlightenment will be driven by the spread of metasystemic and dialectical thinking. And so I think I'll stop it there. There's I don't know if I connected all the points. I was a little bit fatigued in recent days, so I didn't get as much detail as I wanted, but hopefully that made some sort of sense to you guys, and I want to open it up for questions. Chris.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you, Brandon, for the presentation on going over the Enlightenment. And I think combining subjective and objective is pretty important. But I'd also say, because you went through the Enlightenment values, there's an ongoing culture war in which people are saying postmodernism is eroding or sort of destroying the Enlightenment values. And my argument happens to be, no, postmodernism within its historical and particular are trying to give Enlightenment values and democracy to more and more groups. So my ultimate question is, how can we be more mindful of postmodernism? Thank you.
Yeah, and in fact, it was something I wanted to add. I just didn't get around to it. It would have taken me actually even longer almost. But Richard Tarn is talking about how postmodernism does transcend and include the Enlightenment. Actually, he was talking about it wasn't specifically postmodernism that he was talking about more directly. It was romanticism, but then you could extrapolate from that to say, you are actually, some of those Enlightenment values are still there within postmodernism, although there are forms of postmodernism that, if you take them, I guess literally, and a lot of people do and misunderstand, like Derrida, then they would seem to be anti-Enlightenment, and a lot of times, it actually is literally presented by that as that in some cases. So yes, I think that what is needed is to take these postmodern ideas seriously. And I like how Joseph Ananda Storm said, the worst thing you can do with postmodernism is to try to laugh it out of the room, because it's not going to work. That's what Jordan Peterson tries to do. And so there's quite a bit more than I think we only got like 1 minute here. Anyone else has any questions? Cory, did you have any questions?
No, I don't. And if no one else has any questions, then I think we'll wrap it up. So thank you, Brandon, for that presentation. It was very clear, easy to follow, even though you were feeling a bit fatigued. Nonetheless, it came through for me.
All right.
Okay, that's it. Thanks, everyone, for coming.
Can I save the chat here?
Yes, you can.
All right, let me just see how it's not working even though I'm the one who started the meeting. Oh, it's right here. Okay. All right, thank you very much. Thanks everyone for coming.